essay by Sigmund Freud, and the essay is Uncanny. A 1919 essay by Sigmund Freud that talks about some of the very critical experience of familiarity and unfamiliarity. It talks about some of that hidden secret trauma, terror, horrible experiences that one can have. So in the second part of the essay, Uncanny, Freud is introducing to a story by E.T.A. Hoffman. Now, E.T.A. Hoffman's essay, Hoffman was very popular as a writer, and he wrote so many uh, short stories, and he had a very turbulent phase in his life because he attempted so many things at a time, and also opera, music, writing, creative writing, stories, and so many things. Now, E.T. Hoffman gradually became very, very popular, and his the Sandman story was also it was a great success. Somehow, this story, Freud thought that should be referred to in this essay, Uncanny, only because the kind of very difficult and equation of the mind as it is explored in a story like The Sandman, it is something that can immediately make us feel what exactly uncanny is. How is uncanny operated in our brain? How does an individual is very much afraid of for a particular event, and the story talks about that human psyche and that fearful event that one passes through. So I think we can connect to the story when we go to the text Uncanny and the kind of translation that we are using. Let's go to the essay directly in the second part of the discussion. Now, in the second part of the discussion, Freud helps us to get to the environment of uncanny atmosphere in fictions. In proceeding to review those things, persons, impressions, events, and situations which are able to arouse in us a feeling of the uncanny in a very forcible and definite form, the first requirement is obviously to select a suitable example to start up with. So we cannot actually understand until or unless we are given to that very space that we call almost exact kind of an environment to know what uncanny actually is. So we need a story. We need a particular reference that can immediately take us into that feeling that can help us to know what uncanny actually is. Gentis, the person who has already been referred to, Gentis is the person who had started working on uncanny far ahead of Sigmund Freud. And Gentis is the one of the pioneers who had several contributions in that human psychological experience that we call uncanny. Gentis has taken as a very good instance doubts whether an apparently animate being is really alive, or conversely, whether a lifeless object might not be in fact animate. So, if something that is inanimate, if suddenly it is found that the particular thing is full of life, or the lifeless object behaves differently. So if it doesn't match with our feelings and emotions, then we can immediately think of something airy, something difficult is happening over there. It creates the sense of fear, hence the sense of uncanny. He refers to the connection to the impression made by work figures, works, artificial dolls and automatons. So these are something artificial dolls and who often behave to speak just like normal human being, and such kind of behavior that people don't expect exactly. And we often see so many Bollywood and Hollywood movies are there in which such airy, fear, afraid, that environment is created, and that sense of uncanny is very much created over there. So it's all about the uncanny atmosphere. It's all about that sense of fear, because on the basis of this particular theories, on the basis of that particular conditions, uncanny is being practiced. Freud continues that narrative. He adds to this class the uncanny effect of epileptic seizures and the manifestations of insanity. Because this excite in the spectator the feeling that automatic mechanical processes are at work, concealed beneath the ordinary appearance of animation. Without entirely accepting the author's view, we will take it as a starting point for an investigation, because it leads us on to consider a writer succeeded better than anyone else in the product producing uncanny effect. So this uncanny effect, when it happens, the character starts behaving differently. There is a sense of insanity, and this sense of airiness is something that uncanny is attached to. Freud again refers to Gentis. Gentis says, in telling a story, one of the most successful devices for easily creating uncanny effects is to leave the reader in uncertainty whether a particular figure in the story is a human being or an automation, and to do it in such a way that his attention is not directly focused upon his uncertainty, so that he may not be urged to go into the matter and clear it up immediately, since that, as we have said, would quickly dissipate the peculiar emotional effect of the thing. So look, the reference of Gentis and the telling of the story, how telling of the story can immediately create a sense of uncanny in the mind of the audience. It has such a direct effect on the mind of the audience that immediately he starts imagining it something very horrible, something that is full of uncertainties, and it creates a sense of terror in the mind. And here he comes to the point to the story of the Sandman. And he refers the story of the Sandman in Hoffman's text, Nostaken. It was exactly written in German language, contains the original of Olympia, the doll in the fact act Offenbach's opera. We have already mentioned that E.T.A. Hoffman, he worked for opera in so many times. Tales of Hoffman, but I cannot think, and I hope that most readers of the story will agree with me that the theme of doll Olympia, who is to all appearances a living being, is by any means the only element to be held responsible for the quite unparalleled atmosphere of uncanniness which the story evokes. Now, when someone goes to the story of Hoffman's The Sandman, an unparalleled event of uncanny atmosphere is evoked, it's created, and it will give a sensational feeling to every individual who will go through the text. Now, what is the basic idea of the Sandman is? The main theme of this story is something different, which gives the name to the story and which is always reintroduced at the critical moment. The theme of the Sandman tears our children's eyes. It's all about that a boy, a child is always having that mysterious fear and trauma of losing the eyes. The fantastic tale begins with the childhood recollection of a character named Nathaniel. In spite of his present happiness, he cannot banish the memories associated with the mysterious and terrifying death of the father he loved. So, losing the father figure, the father in one hand, and at the same time, the childhood trauma that is very much there, that someone is losing the eyes. From that trauma, the character Nathaniel never can takes himself away. On certain evenings, his mother used to send the children to bed early, warning them the Sandman was coming. Now, look the kind of environment in which the character Nathaniel, the protagonist of the story, the Sandman, that his mother used to tell Nathaniel that go to the bed early. If you don't go to the bed early, what will happen? The Sandman will come. Now, it is a kind of a very common notion that mothers across the globe, they often try to create something imaginary in their mind so that the children in the family, they get frightened. They can be under the control. So this is the kind of a thing that is often seen. And look, the very popular lullaby. Lullaby is actually songs that lull a child into sleep. Lullaby are sleeping songs that often the mother used to rhyme so that the baby, the child can go to the sleep. Now, one of the very popular lullaby in Bengal, that the little baby is about to sleep, or the baby is warned by the mother to go to the sleep very soon. If he or she doesn't go to the sleep, what will happen? The burgi will come. And when the baby will be in a sound sleep, the whole locality will be at peace. And the burgi will come, but the burgi will, they cannot identify from where or when, which particular family the sound of the crying of the baby is coming out. And if the burgis come, how will the tax be paid? Because there is famine and no one is having enough amount of money or wealth or grains in this year because of the weather and other similar kind of conditions. Now, this is a very popular lullaby that we often say in Bengal, ছেলে ঘুমোলো পাড়া জুড়োলো বর্গি এলো দেশে বুলবুলিতে ধান খেয়েছে খাজনা দেব কিসে. Now if you look at the very inner story of the Burgi, now the Burgis are real characters, not like imaginary or fictitious characters that Freud is here trying to attach to while telling the story of the Sandman. Burgis are real life characters and they used to come in Bengal, and they are actually those Marathas after the Peshwa. When the Marathas were in crisis, they used to come in Bengal to loot wealth from here. So this lullaby also talks about social and the cultural history of Bengal. And so many innocent Bengalis were then butchered. They were killed and murdered by the Burgis. So all the women, the common folk of the time, they were very much afraid of the terror that was known as Burgi at that time. Now look, when a child is always frightened in the name of the Burgi, the baby will gradually create or imagine of a kind of a very frightening object. Now here in the case of Burgi, it is real one. In the case of E.T.A. Hoffman's story, as it is in the case of Nathaniel and Nathaniel's mother, the mother used to tell to control the activities of the little boy that the Sandman is coming. And sure enough, Nathaniel would not fail to hear the heavy tread of a visitor. You know, this kind of imaginary fear in the mind of a little boy, and for who cannot employ his own rationality very powerfully, rather he has to put it in belief whatever the elders are saying. Now out of that heavy imagination, in reality he thinks that a visitor comes at night, and the visitor is no other than a Sandman, the heavy tread of a visitor with whom his father would then be occupied that evening. And the Sandman will be staying and passing time with his father. When questioned about the Sandman, the mother, it is true, denied that such a person existed except as a form of speech. But when in another occasion the boy Nathaniel asked his mother that, was there any such person called Sandman? Then she replied, no, it is only a fictitious character, only to put you under control, only to make a sense of fear in your mind and nothing else. But the imagination, that fearful imagination, it was always in his mind, in the mind of Nathaniel. His nurse could give him more definite information, and often such kind of fearful, fictitious imagination, terrified imagination, they are more highlighted by whom? By the other associates of the family. Just like I would like to give another very real life example in this context, and this one is from the story is from, so far I do remember, the Tagore's reminiscences of the childhood days. Now Tagore's reminiscences of the childhood days, Tagore's had a very huge family, and Rabindranath Tagore could hardly enjoy the attachment, care, nurture of his mother. In Jivan Smriti, where he records the memory of his childhood days, Rabindranath Tagore has recorded that he could have only the care, love, attention of the mother, primarily when the boys, the children, they fell ill. Otherwise, they all were guided by the servants. Now, the kind of servant who used to take care of Rabindranath Tagore, he could imagine such kind of very fearful experiences. And some funny events are also recorded that when on the day Tagore used to love luchis. Luchi, actually, we all know that fried, uh, you know, very tasty, a kind of a dish made out of maida, flour, and one of the very popular kind of a dishes as a snacks. It may be taken in the morning or it may be taken in the evening. But Tagore was in love with this luchis since his childhood days. But the kind of servant who used to take care of him, he used to give luchis to Tagore one by one, very gradually, with a kind of a sense that if Tagore declares, I don't need any more, then the rest of the luchis will be of his. He will take care of them. So this servant, as recorded in the Jivan Smriti of Tagore, used to draw some marks just in front of the gate of the room, of the door, that this is the Lakshman Rekha. And you know what happened in Ramayana? When Sita crossed the Lakshman Rekha, then that monster, Daitya, that Ravana came and took Sita away. And what happened to Sita? Sita was then kept in that, Lanka. And it was a huge struggle between Sita, between Rama and Ravana. Then ultimately Sita was rescued after the abduction. Now, if that was the story and that was a particular marker in front of the gate, in front of the door, now little Rabi used to imagine really there will be a Ravana from any one of the corners of the room. If he crosses that particular Lakshman Rekha that was drawn by that servant who took care of him. Look, these imaginary events are very strong in the case of the childs, in the case of the young minds, because they hardly can apply their rationality. Since they hardly can apply their rationality, so it is very serious kind of an event for them. And here in the case of Nathaniel, in the story The Sandman, we find the same sort of trauma was always with him, because it was declared first by his mother, then by the nurse. The nurse actually supplemented more terror, more trauma, and the nurses often do, so that the boy, the child, is always obedient to him or her. Now look, as Freud is recording here, so the way the nurse also supplemented more trauma, more fear in the mind of the young Nathaniel. He is a wicked man who comes when children won't go to bed and throws handfuls of sand in their eyes so that they jump out of their heads all bleeding. Then he puts the eyes in a sack and carries them off to the moon to feed his children. They sit up there in their nest and their beaks are hooked like owls' beaks, and they use them to pick up naughty boys' and girls' eyes with. Look, if this is the story that is told to a little boy, think of the particular condition, the mental condition, the mental trauma that he or she will be suffering from. That the sandman will carry sands with him and will throw to the boys to the child who don't go to the bed in time. And what will happen? They will put the eyes in sack and carries them off. They will, from the eyeballs will be snatched from the face, and they will take it with them and they will go back to the home. And then in the nest, the sandman has his own children and they will feed the eyes collected in that very way. So this is a kind of a trauma that can be in the mind for long. So in Indian context, in the context of Bengal, the fear of the ghost, bhuter bhoy. Look, no one has ever seen what ghost is. But those who are the child, now often the fear, I don't know if any one of you have really till now, but this is something that is injected since the childhood days by the elders, so that they are always obedient and they don't go to the outside of the home at night, because there is a kind of a story always in the back. If you go out in dark, out of your home, if you are not obedient, so what will happen? The ghost will come and will eat you up. And when it is the child is now a grown-up human being, he still continues the same sort of trauma within him. So the trauma, this uncanny feeling, often culture-oriented, often it is injected by the society, by your environment, by your family, by your culture. And it is something that one carries for a long-term basis. And it is such a mental state that it is very difficult to shed off. It cannot be. It is very difficult. Freud records that although little Nathaniel was sensible and old enough not to believe in such gruesome attributes to the figure of the Sandman, the dream of him became fixed in his breast. He determined to find out what the Sandman looked like. And one evening, when the Sandman was again expected, he hid himself in the father's study. He recognized the visitor as the lawyer Coppelius, a repulsive person of whom the children were frightened when he occasionally came to a meal. And he now identified this Coppelius with the dreaded Sandman. Concerning the rest of the scene, Hoffman already leaves us in doubt whether we are witnessing the first delirium of the panic-stricken boy or a succession of events which are to be regarded in the story as being real. His father and the guest begin to busy themselves at a hearth with glowing flames. The little eavesdropper hears Coppelius call out, "Here with your eyes." So, a mind that is very much afraid of anything it can connect to that very sense of fear, sense of trauma with any kind of communication that is taking place. Now, since Sandman is a very gruesome and fearful character, the one person who used to the house of Nathaniel, that is Mr. Coppelius, he immediately make a kind of a connection to Sandman with Mr. Coppelius. And now Coppelius was having a conversation with Nathaniel's father, and somehow during the conversation, Coppelius uttered the phrase, "Here with your eyes." So once again, the doubt, at least it was in the mind of Nathaniel, it got fixed. Now he can connect one to the another that this Coppelius is no other than the Sandman, because he is talking of here with your eyes. So the taking of the eyeball in other hand and then connecting it to that very real life characters. And this is how our human mind, human brain is actually connected to each other. And how a doubt becomes cemented, a doubt becomes fixed, a doubt ultimately becomes matured gradually. Here with your eyes, and betrays himself by screaming aloud. But the moment Coppelius declared, "Here with your eyes," then young Nathaniel could not control himself. Rather, he started screaming out. He started immediately announcing, "Oh my God," or some kind of feeling that he caught red-handed that someone is hidden in the chamber. Someone is eavesdropping the conversation going on between Nathaniel's father and Coppelius. Coppelius seizes him and is about to drop grains of red hot coal out of the fire into the house. So his father begs him off and saves the eyes. After this, the boy falls into a deep swoon, and a long illness followed upon the experience. Those who lean towards a rationalistic interpretation of the Sandman will not fail to recognize the child's fantasy. Now, Freud is talking about child's fantasy. So, I would like to add here something that is not connected to Freud or Freudian ideas here. Now, those who are the psychiatrists, those who are the counselors of the child's mind that they work on, they often suggest that the habit that we have our children today, spending most of the time during this COVID-19 with mobile phone, the counselors often suggest that don't give your child your mobile phone, rather give them a book of fantasy, or a book that can heighten the power of imagination. Give them a book of imagination. Fantasy world. Because children's mind actually can access to that very great power of imagination when they are young. At that moment, they can think differently. And this imagination is necessary, according to the counselors of our time. This imagination is necessary whether you are going to be a scientist later on, a nanoscientist, a space scientist, an engineer, an artist, a writer, a thinker, whoever you may be in your future days. That can only be heightened, can be groomed when you, as a little boy of today, you are supplemented with a collection of good books that can help you to develop your imagination. So reading books and making this book reading a very good habit is something that is necessary. That is necessary. So here Freud is highlighting this capacity that we call child's fantasy. And this child's fantasy, according to him, cannot be measured with the rationality. You cannot interpret this fantasy world, how far a child can imagine. It is beyond any limit. It is beyond any situation, this fantasy world. So this is something is the suggestion of Freud. And it continues throughout that particular phase of childhood days. The grains of sand that are to be thrown into the child's eyes turn into red hot grains of coal out of the flame. In both cases, they are meant to make the eyes jump out. In the course of another visit of the Sandman, a year later, his father was killed in his study by an explosion. The lawyer Coppelius vanished from the place without leaving a trace behind. Now, so the child gradually can connect that the Coppelius, the lawyer, actually is a villainous, evil figure. And he exactly is the Sandman, who not only takes the eyes away, but also he is instrumental for the and responsible for the death of his father. And now there is no doubt in the mind of the young Nathaniel that this Coppelius is actually that Sandman who is responsible for his father's death. So I would like to conclude today's talk just making a kind of a overall assessment that this story is all about a child's fantasy. And not only that, the power of child's fantasy is so strong that it can hamper the rest of the life. It is so strong, and if it is not groomed properly, if we place some unknown fear in the mind of a child, it can damage his personality, her personality for good. And it can have some bad effects in later life, a very serious effect. This story, The Sandman, is all about the childhood fantasy and that experience of uncanny. Somehow the boy Nathaniel could connect one from the other, but actually nothing was in that sense rationally connected, but it was the fantasy world of the child that could connect one from the other. And that changed the personality, the thinking process of that boy Nathaniel. And then ultimately when the boy was grown up, and then too, its serious, heavy impact transformed his life and also changed so many of those people who came closer to Nathaniel's life. So uncanny is basically a very serious kind of an experience that an individual can have, and it has a deep impact on the personality. That is the message here. Thank you so much for your patient listening.